The world as Anna once knew it was gone. It had happened quickly. There were rumors, of course, whispers of a virus spreading overseas, then across the country. People dismissed it at first, attributing it to political agendas, or the latest version of an internet hoax. But then the news began reporting images too horrifying to be faked, people, wild-eyed and frenzied, tearing into their fellow humans with terrifying abandon. No one knew how it started, or what triggered it to spread so rapidly, but one thing was clear: the virus turned its victims into ravenous monsters. The cities fell first, with people flocking to shelters in a futile attempt to escape the unstoppable wave. But it didn't matter. No walls were strong enough. The infection spread faster than anyone could have predicted, and what followed was nothing short of an apocalypse. Anna had never imagined she'd find herself in the middle of a nightmare, fighting for survival in a world ruled by the walking dead. But here she was, crouched behind a dilapidated wall, her heart hammering in her chest, as she watched the undead shuffle down the street outside. Her fingers gripped the edge of a rusted pipe. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and every noise sent her nerves into a frenzy. The sun was sinking low in the sky, painting the world around her in a warm, dying light. She had been on the move for days now, weeks even, and it never seemed to get easier. The horde was out there. She could hear them, dragging their feet along the cracked pavement, moaning with hunger. The last group of survivors she had met had all been slaughtered in a matter of minutes. There were no rules anymore. No safe places. Only survival. Her stomach growled, reminding her just how long it had been since she'd last eaten. She clutched her backpack tightly, praying there was something edible left in it. She had learned not to waste food, her supplies were scarce, and the world no longer offered easy answers. But Anna wasn't ready to give up yet. She couldn't afford to. There were whispers, rumors from a few survivors who had made it out of the chaos, that there might be a safe zone. A place where the infected hadn't yet taken hold. A haven where humans could rebuild, where things could be normal again. It was a desperate hope, but it was the only one she had left. Taking a deep breath, Anna slowly rose to her feet, making sure her movements were silent. The last thing she needed was to attract the attention of the undead. She peered around the corner of the building, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The street was empty for the moment, but she knew better than to trust that it would stay quiet for long. Her escape from the last encounter had been nothing short of miraculous. Anna had learned the hard way that a single mistake could mean the end. It didn't matter how quick you were or how smart. The dead were relentless, and no matter how much she wanted to believe she was in control, she knew it wasn't true. In the distance, she heard the faint crackle of static from a broken radio, and her pulse quickened. She had no idea who might be broadcasting, or even if the message was meant for her, but it was a sign. A reminder that there were still others out there. Help! The word echoed in her mind as the radio signal cut off, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering through the ruined city. Was it real? Was it a trap? Anna's instincts screamed at her to run, to avoid any potential contact with other survivors. Trust was a rare commodity now, and every encounter had the potential to be the last. But the possibility of another living person, someone who might offer safety, might offer a chance for survival, she couldn't ignore it. Gripping her backpack, Anna made a decision. She had no choice but to take the risk. Her legs, stiff from days of constant motion, carried her into the night, her steps light but determined. The further she moved into the decimated city, the more the weight of despair pressed on her. She passed abandoned cars, shattered windows, and empty buildings. The once bustling streets were now graveyards, the echo of humanity's fall reverberating in every shattered piece of glass. As she reached the edge of the district, Anna paused. In the distance, she saw the glow of firelight. A campfire. There were survivors here. It wasn't much, but it was something. Without hesitation, she moved toward it, her breath catching in her throat. The world felt still. Too still. Please, let there be someone here, she whispered to herself, as she stepped carefully closer. Then she saw them, a group of ragged figures huddled around the fire, their faces half hidden in the flickering shadows. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't alone anymore. But just as she was about to call out to them, something made her stop. There was a low, guttural growl from the darkness behind them. And then, the ground trembled as the undead emerged from the shadows. Anna froze. Her pulse hammered in her ears as the horrifying sound of growls and shuffles pierced the night air. The group around the fire had not yet noticed. The figures, huddled close together, seemed to be talking, their voices muffled in the growing tension. She could see them now, emerging from the shadows, undead creatures that were barely human anymore. Their bodies were rotting, their eyes vacant and clouded with an insatiable hunger. They stumbled forward with jerky, awkward movements, drawn to the warmth of the fire, to the scent of living flesh. The survivors around the campfire were unaware, engrossed in their quiet conversation, oblivious to the encroaching danger. Anna's stomach dropped. She couldn't just wait for them to realize the threat and be slaughtered like the others had been. Her heart raced, and a quick, calculated plan began to form in her mind. She quickly ducked behind a half-collapsed wall, peering over the edge to study the situation. The horde was still a few yards away, enough time to act. Anna had no weapons, no real way of defending herself, but her mind was sharp, and her instincts were better than ever. In this new world, she had learned to adapt, to think quickly, and to trust her gut. She scanned the area for anything useful. There were no firearms lying around, but there was a rusted crowbar on the ground, half buried in the debris. It wasn't much, but it could do the trick if she needed to get close enough. She bit her lip, considering her options. Moving fast was critical, but so was the element of surprise. If she attacked too soon, she risked being noticed by the survivors. If she waited too long, the undead might overwhelm the camp before they had a chance to react. A sudden thought jolted her: the radio. The static-filled voice she had heard earlier might not have been a fluke. If she could reach it, maybe she could call for help, or at the very least, alert others nearby. But the radio was closer to the fire, right where the survivors were sitting, and those creatures were too close. Her eyes darted between the group and the approaching horde. Anna's pulse quickened. She couldn't afford to hesitate. With a sharp breath, she slid the crowbar into her backpack and quietly crept toward the fire, moving with the stealth of a shadow. The survivors, still unaware, had now begun to shift around, adjusting the firewood. Anna silently moved along the edges of the camp, her heart in her throat. The undead were drawing closer, their guttural growls growing louder, their movements quicker. The survivors were about to realize they were in danger. Anna was almost to the radio. The metallic scent of decay hung thick in the air, and as she reached for the device, a sharp sound broke through the tension. One of the undead had spotted them. A scream erupted from one of the survivors as the first rotting hand reached out, grabbing a man by the arm. His cries filled the air, but they were quickly drowned out by the growls and snarls of the oncoming horde. In an instant, chaos erupted. Anna's instincts took over. She grabbed the radio, ripping it free from its cracked stand and pressing it to her ear. Her hands were shaking, but she couldn't focus on the fear now. There was no time for fear. "Hello," she whispered urgently, her voice barely a breath. "Nothing. Just static." Another scream rang out. Anna's breath caught in her throat, but she kept pressing the radio to her ear, praying for a response. The sound of bodies crashing against each other, of flesh tearing and bones snapping, filled the air. She could barely hear herself think. Then, just as she was about to give up, a voice broke through the static. "This is Outpost 4, we hear you." "Repeat, Outpost 4. Do you copy?" Anna's heart skipped a beat. She clutched the radio harder, her grip tightening until her knuckles turned white. The horde was closing in fast. She didn't have much time. "This is Anna," she gasped, her voice hoarse with fear. "Please, I'm at..." But before she could finish, the radio crackled violently, and the connection was lost. "No!" Anna shouted, her voice breaking. The horde was almost on top of them now. There was no time left. The survivors, in full panic, were scrambling for weapons, trying to push back the undead. It was a massacre in the making. Anna could see them now, the way the undead tore into the living, their teeth sinking into fragile flesh. The survivors fought back with whatever they had, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. She couldn't just watch. She couldn't just stand there. Thinking fast, Anna rushed forward, slipping into the camp with one goal in mind: survival. She wasn't sure if the group of survivors even saw her, their eyes wide with panic, but she didn't care. There were too many zombies coming at them from every direction. With a grim determination, Anna swung the crowbar at the nearest zombie, the impact causing a sickening crunch as it collapsed in a heap. The survivor beside her barely noticed, too frantic to focus on her or anything but the growing wave of the undead. "Come on!" Anna shouted at the nearest survivor, a woman in a bloodied shirt who had clearly lost all hope. "We need to move. Now!" The woman looked at her, eyes glazed, then nodded, and together they ran. But as they turned to flee, the ground beneath their feet trembled again, and the echo of more undead groaning filled the air. There was no turning back now. Anna's legs burned as she sprinted, her breath ragged and sharp in the cold night air. The woman, whose name Anna still didn't know, was just a few steps behind her, panting and stumbling with every footfall. The chaotic sounds of the horde closing in were deafening, the sickening groans, the wet sounds of flesh being torn apart, the screams of the survivors left behind. Every second felt like an eternity. "We need to get to higher ground," Anna shouted over the roar of the undead. She had no idea where she was leading them, no plan, no clear destination. But instinct was all she had left. Survival had become a race against time. The woman beside her nodded weakly, her face pale and streaked with dirt and sweat. She didn't seem to have the strength to argue, but Anna could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that gnawed at her own insides. They turned a corner, heading into the next block, and Anna barely suppressed a curse as she realized they had entered a dead end. The street was blocked by a collapsed building, rubble scattered everywhere. There was no way out. Anna's pulse quickened. She was cornered, trapped. And she could hear the unmistakable shuffle of the undead getting closer. "Shit!" Anna whispered, pushing the woman behind her and scanning the area desperately. Her gaze landed on a fire escape ladder attached to the side of a crumbling building. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "Up there," she shouted, already running toward the ladder. The woman didn't hesitate this time. Together, they scrambled up the rusty iron rungs, their hands slipping from the cold metal, the sounds of the horde growing ever louder behind them. Anna's heart was in her throat as she reached the top, pulling herself over the edge of the rooftop with trembling hands. She barely had time to take a breath before she turned and helped the woman up. They were safe, for now. The city spread out beneath them, a vast wasteland of ruined buildings, crumbling roads, and the occasional flicker of a fire in the distance. It was silent, save for the distant moans of the undead below. But Anna knew better than to think the safety of the roof would last. The undead had no need for rest, no need for sleep. They would find them, sooner or later. The woman slumped against the wall of the building, breathing heavily. Her eyes were wide, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Anna didn't know what to say. She wasn't a leader, not by choice. But this was the new reality they lived in. Survival came at a price. There was no room for weakness. Anna glanced back at the fire escape. The horde was still out there, moving through the streets like a wave, searching for anything alive. She didn't have to look closely to know they were getting closer to the building. The undead were drawn to noise, to the scent of blood and fear, and they would continue hunting until the city was emptied. "Do you know what happened to the others?" Anna asked, her voice rough. The woman, still catching her breath, glanced up, her face etched with disbelief. "They're gone," she said quietly. "I don't even know how we got out of there, it was a blur. One moment, we were sitting around the fire, trying to find some kind of peace. Then they just came out of nowhere." Anna nodded grimly, trying not to dwell on the image of what the woman had witnessed. "They won't stop," Anna muttered, more to herself than to the woman. "We're all just running out of time." There was a pause, the air thick with the weight of their new reality. Then the woman spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" Anna hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to reveal. Trust was a fragile thing now, something she had learned the hard way to handle with care. But for some reason, the woman's simple question hit a nerve. "I'm Anna," she said, finally. "And you?" "Grace," the woman replied, pulling her knees to her chest, her face tired but resolute. I was with a group. A family, really. But she stopped herself, her voice breaking. She didn't need to say more. The grief was in her eyes, a painful reminder of the world they once knew. Anna turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to dip below the ruined skyline. It was a bitter reminder of the life they had all lost. She didn't know if there was any hope left in this world, or if they would ever find it again. All she knew was that every moment counted. Grace leaned back against the brick wall, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. "What do we do now?" Anna thought about the radio, the one that had sparked hope in her heart earlier. There had been a voice, a sign that there were others out there, a chance that this nightmare wasn't endless. Maybe Outpost 4 was real. Maybe it wasn't. But if they had any chance of surviving, they would have to find out. "We move at dawn," Anna said with grim determination. "We get to the next building. We find a way to get out of the city. There's a chance, Grace. There's always a chance." The wind howled between the broken buildings, and Anna shivered despite the cold. She could hear the faint groans of the undead below. They weren't far. But in this new world, there was one truth that still burned in her mind: hope was a luxury. Survival was the only reality. And it was a reality she wasn't ready to lose. The first light of dawn painted the broken city in shades of red and orange, casting long, eerie shadows over the rubble-strewn streets. Anna didn't know what time it was. Days had blurred together, and the sense of time was fading along with her hope. But one thing was clear: if they didn't move soon, they would be trapped again. "Grace," Anna whispered, glancing over her shoulder at the woman, who had barely slept the night before. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, but she was awake now, preparing to move. The cold wind had begun to pick up, adding a chill to the already bitter air. Grace nodded but said nothing, her eyes distant. Anna could tell she was mentally exhausted, her will worn thin by the constant fear and loss. The way she had flinched when Anna had asked about her past told Anna everything she needed to know. Grace had lost more than just people. She had lost pieces of herself. "We need to go now," Anna pressed, checking the makeshift map she had scribbled on a torn piece of cloth. They had a few supplies left, some water, a couple of cans of food, but it wouldn't be enough for long. They had to find shelter, and fast. The radio message had given them a sliver of hope, but it was a long shot. They weren't even sure if the signal was real. But Anna couldn't ignore it. Not now. Grace didn't argue. She stood up slowly, stretching stiffly, and they both moved quietly to the edge of the rooftop. The street below was empty, but Anna knew it wouldn't stay that way. They had to keep moving, or the city would swallow them whole. The descent from the building was slow and careful. Each step was deliberate, each creak of the fire escape sending a wave of tension through Anna's body. It felt as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they reached the ground, Anna's heart pounded in her chest. The morning light revealed the devastation around them: burned-out cars, shattered windows, entire blocks of buildings reduced to rubble. A city that had once been alive, bustling with people and noise, was now a ghost town. The only thing that moved in this hollow shell of humanity were the undead, mindlessly wandering, drawn to the scent of flesh. The silence was suffocating. "Stay close," Anna whispered, motioning for Grace to follow her. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows of buildings, avoiding the main roads where they were more likely to be seen. Every so often, Anna would pause, listening for any sign of danger. The occasional moan of a zombie would pierce the silence, and Anna would hold her breath, praying they weren't close. They turned down an alleyway, its walls covered in graffiti, a bleak reminder of the world before the world ended. A faint smell of decay drifted in the air, and Anna's stomach twisted. The infected were never far, and she could feel their presence, even if she couldn't see them. The alley opened up to another street, and Anna froze. Ahead, a group of zombies wandered aimlessly, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the rising sun. They were too many to avoid, there was no chance of slipping past them unnoticed. Anna scanned the area, her mind racing. "We need to get off the street," she murmured. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. A narrow passageway between two crumbling buildings caught her attention. It was a tight squeeze, but it was their only chance. She grabbed Grace by the arm, pulling her toward the opening. "Stay quiet. Move fast," Anna ordered, her voice low but urgent. The alleyway was even more narrow than it appeared, and they had to shuffle sideways to get through. The scent of rot grew stronger, and Anna's skin crawled with the unmistakable feeling that they were being watched. The air was thick with tension as they slowly made their way through the darkened space. Suddenly, a soft scraping sound came from behind them. Anna's blood ran cold. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat, but saw nothing. Only the shadows. "Did you hear that?" Grace whispered, her voice shaky. Anna nodded. "Keep moving." Quietly. They pushed forward, their pace quickening, when Anna's foot caught on something. She stumbled but managed to catch herself before making any noise. Too late. The sound of shuffling footsteps reached her ears. It was unmistakable. They weren't alone anymore. "Run!" Anna shouted, grabbing Grace's arm and pulling her through the narrow passage with every ounce of strength she had left. They emerged from the alleyway into another deserted street, but this time, they couldn't afford to be subtle. The undead were right behind them, closing in fast. Anna's breath was ragged as she ran, the sharp crack of her boots hitting the cracked pavement reverberating in her ears. Grace was struggling to keep up, her body not as fast or nimble as Anna's. "Don't look back," Anna ordered, her voice strained with panic. "Just keep moving." But the more they ran, the more Anna realized that they weren't going to outrun them. The zombies were faster than they had been last time she had encountered them. Something about this new breed of undead, if that's what they were, had changed. Anna glanced over her shoulder just in time to see one of the creatures lunging toward Grace. "No!" Anna screamed, but her warning came too late. The creature's hands latched onto Grace's ankle, dragging her to the ground with terrifying speed. Grace let out a strangled cry, her hands scraping against the pavement as she tried to push herself free. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Anna had no choice. She couldn't leave her behind. With a burst of adrenaline, Anna turned back, ignoring the rush of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She shoved the zombie off Grace and grabbed her by the arms, pulling her to her feet. "Get up!" Anna shouted. "We need to move." The undead were swarming in, more and more, filling the street, their growls growing louder. But just as they were about to be overwhelmed, a distant sound reached Anna's ears, a vehicle. She didn't know who it was or how long it would take them to reach the car, but this was their only chance. "Move now," she screamed again, shoving Grace forward. And then, against all odds, they ran, praying they could make it out alive. The sound of the engine revving grew louder, cutting through the tense silence like a beacon of hope. Anna's heart raced, each beat a desperate plea for survival. She grabbed Grace's wrist and pulled her forward with all the strength she had left, her legs burning with each step as they sprinted toward the vehicle. The zombies, now in a frenzy, shuffled faster, their twisted forms growing nearer with every passing second. The shrieks of the undead echoed in the narrow streets, their insatiable hunger for human flesh filling the air. Anna could feel the cold breath of death on her neck, but she didn't dare look back. The vehicle appeared in the distance, a dilapidated truck, its headlights cutting through the dim morning light. It was moving toward them, slowly but steadily. There was no time to waste. Anna's muscles screamed in protest as she pushed herself harder, urging Grace to do the same. "Almost there," Anna shouted, her voice hoarse. Grace, her face pale and strained with exertion, didn't respond. She was too exhausted, too terrified. But she kept moving, stumbling a few steps behind Anna. The truck's headlights blinded them for a moment, and Anna shielded her eyes, unable to see who was driving. She wasn't sure if they could trust whoever it was, but they had no choice. They were running out of time, and this was their chance. As they reached the truck, the door swung open with a screech. A tall man, covered in dirt and blood, stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear and urgency. "Get in," he shouted, his voice gruff. Without thinking, Anna grabbed Grace and pulled her toward the truck. The man reached down, helping them climb into the back, just as the first wave of zombies surged forward. Anna scrambled to the back of the truck, pulling Grace up after her, and in the next instant, the vehicle lurched forward, kicking up dust and debris as it sped down the street. The truck's tires screeched as they barreled through the ruins of the city, the undead close behind but growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Anna let out a shaky breath, her heart still pounding in her chest. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a dull ache in her limbs and a gnawing emptiness in her stomach. She glanced over at Grace, who was sitting against the truck bed, her face pale and drawn. Grace was shaking, her eyes glazed, but Anna could see a flicker of hope in them, faint, but real. "Are you okay?" Anna asked, her voice softer now. Grace nodded weakly, but her gaze flickered toward the road behind them. "How long before they catch up?" Anna didn't answer right away. She couldn't give her false hope. The truck was fast, but it wouldn't outrun the horde forever. They had a few minutes at most before the undead regrouped and started following them again. She had to think. She had to come up with a plan. The man driving the truck glanced over his shoulder at them, his face grim. "We're not out of danger yet," he said. "Those things don't stop." Anna nodded. "We know." "Where are you headed?" he asked. Anna hesitated for a moment before responding. "Outpost 4. We heard a signal, a voice on the radio. We're hoping they're still alive." The man's eyes darkened. "I've heard rumors about that place. Some say it's just a myth. But if it's real, you're not going to get there without a fight." "I don't care," Anna replied, her voice hard. "We have to try." Grace shifted beside her, her eyes flicking nervously from the rearview mirror to the horizon. She still looked exhausted, but the hope Anna had seen before was flickering brighter. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The truck raced through the empty streets, bouncing over potholes and wrecked cars. The city had become a labyrinth of destruction, the once familiar landmarks now unrecognizable piles of rubble. Anna felt a deep ache in her chest as she glanced out at the desolate landscape. This was the world they now lived in, broken, abandoned, and haunted by the dead. For the first time since the outbreak, Anna allowed herself a moment of relief. They were alive, and for now, that was enough. But as the truck sped through the deserted city, Anna's thoughts turned to the future. If Outpost 4 was real, would they even find safety there? Was it truly a sanctuary, or was it just another cruel illusion, a hope built on a lie? She didn't know. But she couldn't afford to think about that now. "Hold on," the man said, his voice tense. "There's a bridge up ahead. It's gonna be tight." Anna's stomach tightened. Bridges were dangerous. Zombies could swarm in, and the narrow pathways made it nearly impossible to escape. But there was no turning back now. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. As the truck neared the bridge, Anna's eyes scanned the horizon, watching for any signs of danger. There were no undead in sight, but that didn't mean they weren't coming. The silence was too thick, too heavy. And then, as they reached the bridge, Anna saw it. A lone figure stood in the middle of the road, silhouetted against the early morning light. The figure didn't move, but Anna could see the glint of metal in their hand. "Stop the truck!" Anna shouted, her voice hoarse. The man driving slammed on the brakes, and the truck screeched to a halt just a few feet from the figure. The silence was deafening. The figure turned slowly, and Anna's heart skipped a beat. It was a man, his face covered in dirt, his clothes torn and stained with blood. He was holding a rifle, and his eyes locked onto Anna's with a gaze that was as cold and unforgiving as the world they now lived in. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Who was this man? And what did he want? The man with the rifle stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You're not getting through here," he said, his voice low and threatening. Anna's heart raced. What was happening? They had been so close to safety, and now they were face to face with another danger. "Please," Anna said, her voice shaking. "We're just trying to survive." The man didn't move, his rifle still trained on them. "Everyone's just trying to survive. You're not the only ones who think you deserve to make it." The air was thick with tension. Anna's mind raced. What was their next move? How far would they have to go to survive this nightmare? And, most importantly, could they trust this man with their lives? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain: the world they had once known was gone. And in its place was a brutal, unforgiving world where only the strongest would survive. Anna braced herself, knowing that what happened next could determine whether they lived to see another day. The silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the sound of the wind rattling the truck's metal frame. Anna's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at the figure blocking their path. The man with the rifle didn't lower his weapon. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating. Anna's fingers tightened around the edge of the truck's bed, and Grace sat beside her, tense and trembling. The moment felt suspended, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Finally, Anna found her voice, though it trembled. "We're not here to hurt you. We're just trying to survive." The man didn't flinch. His eyes scanned them, taking in their ragged clothes, the bloodstains, the exhaustion in their faces. He seemed to weigh their words, his rifle unwavering in his hands. "You're not the first ones to try and survive," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraping against stone. "Out here, survival doesn't mean much if you don't have something to offer." Anna swallowed, trying to hide the flicker of fear in her gut. "We don't have much," she said quickly. "But we heard about a place, Outpost 4. We've been trying to get there. We just need a way through." The man's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Outpost 4, he repeated, a cynical edge to his tone. "You think that place still exists?" I don't know," Anna admitted, her voice quieter now. "But we have to try. We can't just wait here to die." The man paused, the rifle never wavering. The weight of his scrutiny made Anna feel small, exposed, but she stood her ground. She had no other choice. "Why should I help you?" the man asked, his voice colder now, each word a challenge. "What makes you different from all the other fools who've come here with their stories of salvation?" Anna's mind raced. She couldn't afford to anger him, she couldn't afford to lose this chance. She glanced at Grace, whose eyes were wide with fear, and then back at the man. "We're not asking for charity," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're asking for a chance. A chance to make it to a place that could save us. And we'll help you if we can. If you let us." The man's gaze flicked between Anna and Grace, his eyes scanning them as though searching for any hint of deception. But Anna held his stare, determined, not willing to back down. Finally, the man let out a long sigh, lowering his rifle slightly. "You want to make it to Outpost 4? You're going to need more than just guts, sweetheart. You'll need weapons, food, and a way to defend yourselves when the horde shows up. I've seen plenty of people die trying to get there, thinking it was some kind of safe haven. The truth is, it's a death trap unless you're prepared." Anna nodded, relief washing over her, but the man's words were chilling. A death trap. They had to make it anyway. There was no other option. "I know," she said softly. "We've survived this far, and we'll keep fighting to make it. Just give us a chance." The man studied her for a long moment before stepping back, his rifle now pointing at the ground. "Fine," he said. "I'll give you a chance. But I'm not taking you in blindly. I'm not stupid." He turned, motioning for them to follow. "Come with me. We've got a place not far from here. If you're serious about Outpost 4, you'll need to prove you're capable." Without another word, he started walking away, his steps purposeful and confident. Anna didn't hesitate. She glanced at Grace, who nodded in agreement, though her face was still a mask of worry. They followed the man in silence, moving quickly through the broken city. The streets felt eerily quiet, the only sounds the soft crunch of their footsteps on the cracked pavement and the occasional distant groan of the undead. Anna's mind was racing. This man was their lifeline now. But what if he was leading them into another trap? What if he was just another survivor, clinging to power in a world where it was every person for themselves? She didn't know the answer, but she had no choice but to trust him for now. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, fortified building, an old warehouse, by the looks of it. The walls were reinforced with metal, and the entrance was protected by a heavy door that looked like it could withstand a horde of zombies. "This is where we stay," the man said, his voice curt. He glanced at Anna and Grace. "It's not much, but it'll do for now." He opened the door and gestured for them to enter. Anna hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and stale food. A handful of people were inside, some sitting around a fire, others leaning against walls, eyes hollow with exhaustion. The man motioned for them to sit. "I'm John," he said, his voice more neutral now. "This is where we've been holding out. You can stay here for a while, but you need to prove yourselves first." Anna looked around, taking in the ragtag group of survivors. They were all different, men, women, children, each with the same haunted look in their eyes. Some looked at Anna and Grace with curiosity, others with suspicion. "How do we prove ourselves?" Anna asked, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. John looked at her with a half-smile, a hint of bitterness in his eyes. "You'll see soon enough. We're not like the others. We survive by our own rules." Anna nodded, her resolve hardening. This was their chance. This was their only chance. She had no idea if Outpost 4 was real, but she wasn't about to die here, stuck in the ruins of a city that had once been home. As John turned to leave, he looked back over his shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we see what you're made of." Anna exchanged a glance with Grace, who seemed lost in thought, her face drawn. She could tell the weight of the situation was pressing down on Grace too. "We can do this," Anna whispered, more to herself than to Grace. But even as she said the words, a gnawing doubt began to creep in. They had survived so much, but the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger. Every step felt like it could be their last. And as she settled down to sleep, she knew that the real test was just beginning. The cold concrete floor of the warehouse felt hard and unforgiving beneath Anna's back. She shifted restlessly, unable to find sleep as the sounds of the outside world filtered through the thick walls. The distant groans of the undead echoed from the streets, muffled by the metal doors, but still, they haunted her. Beside her, Grace slept fitfully, tossing and turning in her own blanket, her face drawn with exhaustion. The glow of the fire flickered in the corner of the room, casting long shadows against the walls. Anna's thoughts were swirling, her mind unable to settle on any one thing for long. John had said they'd be tested tomorrow, but what did that mean? Would they be sent on some dangerous mission? Would they be forced to fight off a horde to prove themselves worthy of staying here? A chill ran down her spine at the thought. She didn't feel ready for whatever test John had in mind. They had made it this far on sheer luck, not skill. But she knew one thing: if they wanted to survive, they had to play by the rules now, whatever those rules were. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Anna sat up, rubbing her eyes and squinting toward the door. A tall, thin woman with short-cropped hair and a scar running down her cheek stepped inside. She had a cold look in her eyes, her posture rigid and purposeful. John wants you up, the woman said flatly. You're needed. Anna didn't ask questions. She grabbed her backpack, shaking Grace awake. We're going, she whispered, voice low. Grace blinked in confusion but nodded, quickly gathering her things. They followed the woman out of the warehouse, into the dim light of the morning. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the streets outside were eerily quiet, too quiet. Anna's nerves were on edge. It felt like the calm before the storm. John was waiting for them at the edge of the building, standing beside a large metal gate that led out into the city. He had a grim expression on his face, arms crossed. You're going on a run, he said without preamble. There's a supply store nearby. It's risky, but it's the best shot we've got. Anna's stomach dropped. A supply run. They had no choice but to go along with it. She glanced at Grace, who looked equally apprehensive, but there was no turning back now. What do we need? Anna asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Food, weapons, and medical supplies, John replied. And keep your eyes open. The area's overrun, but if you're quick, you might be able to get in and out without drawing attention. A knot tightened in Anna's stomach. It sounded too easy. She knew better than to trust anything that seemed easy in this world. John handed her a rifle and a smaller handgun for Grace. The weight of the gun was reassuring, but it didn't ease the tension building in her chest. You're on your own for this one. I'll be monitoring from here. If things go south, we'll come after you, but don't count on it. John's eyes were hard, calculating. This is the test. You prove you can handle this, and you earn your place here. Fail, and you're on your own. Anna's mind raced. She didn't want to think about failure, not now. They had come too far, survived too much to be cast aside now. Understood, Anna said, her voice clipped. We'll get it done. John gave a curt nod before turning to the woman who had led them out. Get them geared up and show them the way. The woman, who Anna now realized had been silently observing their every move, stepped forward and handed them both backpacks filled with extra ammunition, medical supplies, and water. She didn't speak, just gave them a look that clearly said she wasn't going to make this easy. Follow me, the woman said, leading them down a narrow alleyway. Anna kept close to Grace, her senses heightened, eyes darting around for any signs of movement. The quiet was almost unbearable. The woman stopped abruptly at a corner, signaling them to be silent. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The store's just up ahead. You need to be quick. Get what you need, and don't stay longer than necessary. Anna nodded, gripping the rifle in her hands. She exchanged a glance with Grace, who seemed to be trying to steady her own nerves. They moved as silently as possible, creeping along the edge of the buildings. Anna could hear the faintest shuffle in the distance, the unmistakable sound of the undead wandering, but there was no immediate threat. When they reached the store, Anna's heart pounded. It looked abandoned, but there was no telling how long that would last. They had to move quickly, but carefully. They couldn't afford to make a sound. The moment they alerted any zombies, it would be over. The woman pointed to the door. You're on your own now. I'll cover you from here. Get in, get the supplies, and get out. Anna nodded, pushing open the door with a quiet creak. The store was dark, the shelves long since stripped of most supplies. It looked like other survivors had gotten here before them. But there was still a chance they could find something useful. They moved cautiously down the aisles, Anna leading with her rifle raised, scanning every corner, every shadow for any sign of movement. Grace followed close behind, her hand on the small handgun, her eyes wide and alert. As they reached the back of the store, Anna found a stash of canned goods hidden under a shelf. She grabbed as much as she could, stuffing it into her pack, but the silence around them seemed to grow heavier, like the calm before a storm. Suddenly, a noise from the back of the store made Anna freeze. It was a low, guttural groan, the unmistakable sound of a zombie. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she motioned for Grace to stay quiet. A figure emerged from the shadows, one of the undead. Its clothes were tattered, and its face was a grotesque mask of rotting flesh, but it was slow, lumbering. Anna's breath caught in her throat as it staggered toward them, its eyes wide with hunger. Grace lifted her gun, but Anna quickly motioned for her to wait. She didn't want to waste ammo on just one zombie. With a silent gesture, Anna pulled a crowbar from her pack and crept closer, her heart thundering in her chest. As the zombie drew nearer, Anna struck with a swift blow to its skull, the sound of cracking bone echoing in the quiet store. The zombie collapsed to the floor with a sickening thud, but Anna didn't take a breath. She quickly looked around, making sure no others had heard. "We need to go," Anna whispered urgently. Grace nodded, and they moved toward the door, their pace quickening as they neared the exit. But just as they reached the threshold, a sound froze them in place, a chorus of groans from the street. The horde was closing in. With no time to waste, Anna grabbed Grace's arm, pulling her into a sprint. The door slammed shut behind them as they bolted down the alley, their hearts racing, knowing that their test had only just begun. Anna's legs burned as she sprinted down the alley, Grace just behind her, the weight of their packs making every step feel like a battle. The groans of the undead were growing louder, echoing off the walls of the narrow streets. The horde was closing in, and they didn't have much time. "We're not going to make it," Grace gasped, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "We have to." Anna gritted her teeth, pushing herself harder. The sound of the horde's footsteps grew louder with every second. They had to get back to the warehouse. It was the only safe place they knew. Ahead, the woman who had led them to the store was waiting at the mouth of the alley, her rifle raised, scanning the street. When she saw Anna and Grace, she nodded sharply, signaling them to keep moving. "Get to the gate," she shouted over the growing noise of the approaching zombies. Anna's heart pounded in her chest as they closed the distance. They were almost there. The heavy metal gate that separated them from the warehouse felt like the only thing standing between them and death. But as they rounded the corner, the first wave of zombies appeared at the far end of the street. The creatures moved in slow, staggering waves, but their numbers were overwhelming. "There's too many of them," Grace cried, her voice rising in panic. Anna's mind raced. The horde was too large to outrun, and there was no time to hide. They would never make it to the gate unless they fought back. "Get ready," Anna shouted, pulling her rifle from her shoulder and snapping it up into position. Grace followed suit, her hands shaking but determined. The woman at the gate raised her rifle and fired, the sharp crack of the shot splitting the air. One of the zombies in the front of the horde dropped with a sickening thud, but it wasn't enough to stop the oncoming wave. The creatures just kept coming, their minds locked on the scent of the living. Anna's pulse thundered in her ears as she took aim. She fired, hitting a zombie square in the chest. It staggered backward but didn't fall. A second shot brought it down. But for every one they killed, two more seemed to take its place. "Focus," the woman shouted from the gate. "Head for the alley. We can hold them off." Anna nodded, gripping her rifle tighter as they made their way toward the alley. Zombies lurched forward, their grotesque faces twisted in hunger, but they were slower now, easier to pick off. Grace shot beside Anna, her hands trembling but the determination in her eyes unmistakable. Together, they took down a dozen zombies before they reached the alley. The woman was right, they needed to hold their ground, and they needed to do it fast. As they reached the edge of the alley, Anna heard the unmistakable sound of the metal gate starting to creak open. The woman was signaling them to hurry. The horde was just a few yards away now. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the overwhelming sense of dread pressed down on Anna's chest like a weight. "There's too many," Grace shouted, her voice breaking. Her hands were shaking, and Anna could see the fear in her eyes. They had come so far. Could they really survive this? "We've come this far, Grace. We can't stop now," Anna said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The woman continued firing, covering their retreat, but it was clear that their chances were slim. They were being pushed to the edge. The zombies were closing in too quickly. Anna could hear them just behind them, their slow, guttural moans reverberating in the narrow alley. She knew they didn't have much time. The woman had done everything she could to buy them a few extra seconds, but they were about to run out. "Get through the gate, now," the woman yelled, her voice urgent. Anna didn't hesitate. She grabbed Grace by the arm and pulled her toward the gate, which had now opened wide enough to slip through. They were nearly there when a sickening crack echoed through the alley. One of the zombies had lunged at Grace. Time seemed to slow as Anna whipped around, her heart dropping into her stomach. Grace had managed to push the creature back, but its sharp, decayed fingers had scraped across her arm, leaving a bloody mark. The infection would spread. Anna could see it in her friend's eyes, the horror of knowing that one touch was enough to seal her fate. "Grace!" Anna screamed, rushing to her side. But Grace shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "You need to go, Anna." "I can't." "No. We're not leaving you behind." Anna pulled Grace toward the gate, her hands tight on her arm. The woman at the gate hesitated, her face filled with indecision. She saw the situation, understood the gravity of it. But they had no time. The zombies were closing in. Anna could hear their snarls, their shuffling footsteps. They had no choice. "Go," the woman shouted, her voice raw. "We're done here. Get through the gate, now." Anna looked at Grace, tears blurring her vision. She could see the pain in Grace's eyes, the fear that had overtaken her. But the infection was spreading, faster than Anna could process. Grace was no longer the person she had once been. "I'm sorry," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She shoved Grace toward the gate, not giving her time to argue. Grace stumbled through, her body shaking as she fell into the safety of the warehouse. Anna turned just in time to see the first of the zombies reach her. She had no time to think. She grabbed the crowbar from her pack and swung it with everything she had, taking out the first one that lunged toward her. But it was too late. The horde was upon her, swarming her from every direction. She fought back with everything she had, but there were too many. And then, just as she thought she was done for, the woman at the gate pulled her in, grabbing her by the arm and yanking her through. The gate slammed shut behind them, but Anna's heart didn't stop racing. Grace had made it. She had survived. But at what cost? The woman turned to Anna, her expression unreadable. "We're safe for now," she said. "But you have to face the truth. Survival doesn't come easy in this world. And sometimes, it's not enough to just survive. You have to live with the consequences." Anna nodded, her breath ragged. But she wasn't listening to the woman anymore. All she could think about was Grace. Would she be okay? Would she live to see another day? The horde had been stopped, for now. But Anna knew, deep down, that their journey had only just begun. And survival was never guaranteed.